does the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, think he can achieve his new net zero targets without telling us how to live our lives?
Yes, and a particularly pertinent question, given it's COP29, has been for the last few days, and it continues in Azerbaijan. Jonathan.
Well, first of all, these are clearly targets that we need to have, Jan. We have clearly got and are aware of the scale of the challenge around climate change, and the UK is...
What can I just say, right? I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this. Given that Donald Trump seems to be hell-bent on the heat death of Earth, why are we bothering? Like, why bother? Like, the US is just going to open coal mines for the fun of it. Why are we bothering cleaning out the fucking Marmite jars? Like, it seems like a bit of a piss take at this point.
Well,
let's just have air conditioning, even though we don't need it. Bollocks to it. Just randomly spray aerosols into the sky. Fuck them. Bring on the fucking flooding. Because I'm on high ground, so my property price is going to go through the roof.
I think what's frustrating as well is that people keep going, oh, well, we can't, why are we bothering when China do things? When China are putting a real effort into decarbonisation. Like, it's the United States are the real fucking dirty man of the world.
They really are. They make up like 1% of the world's population and like a quarter of the fucking greenhouse gas shit. And that's without even factoring in the fact that most of China's dirty shit is to create stuff for the West. Like, their output of greenhouse gas emissions should be factored into everybody else's shit, because they don't really, well, I mean, obviously they do make stuff for themselves, but they export huge amounts to the West. And the West does the genuinely horrific thing of sending our literal garbage to the Far East as well and just dumping it there. It's a thing we just do in huge quantities because it's cheaper than like doing something here about it, or landfill or whatever.
It's got a major role to play in harnessing opinion around the world to come together to tackle that.
So Keir Starmer's saying we should reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 81% from 1990 levels by 2035. How can he do that without telling us how to live our lives?
Well, fundamentally, it's about innovation. You know, I look at this and I know there's an argument
We
which
don't need
says
to innovate.
we can't.
We have the technology already. They're called clean power, i.e. a combination of wind, solar, tidal and nuclear. These things already exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And the second thing is public transport, right? And again, trains already exist, buses already exist. We can just invest in these things that already exist, right? Unfortunately, that's difficult because that would involve treading on the toes of the petrochemical industry, and that's the problem that we have here. Not the only reason he says innovate is because he wants them to be able to outcompete the petrochemical industry in the market, rather than, I don't know, actually leading and undermining the petrochemical industry through the state.
Kind of living standards that we've got, if we meet these targets, we've got to, you know, eat grass.
That's a joke at the end, not the middle of his life. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Or live in caves, right? And that's not what it's about. This is about how we
it's about eating the bugs.
Of new technology, take advantage of incredible opportunities to get the most for the UK. And I compare it to, you know, like the best-selling book. One of the best-selling books in the 1960s was called The Population Bomb, and it said there's no way the world's population can continue to grow without massive famine and starvation, and it'll all be terrible. None of it was true. It was the best-selling book of the 1960s.
What's interesting about this debate, what's very poignant about this debate specifically, the question being, how are we going to reduce emissions without the nanny state telling us what to do? And what this is a re-emergence of petrochemical industry propaganda about personal carbon footprint, the concept of which is literally a propaganda disinformation campaign brought about by an advertising agency hired by British fucking Petroleum to try and take the heat, if you pardon the expression, off of the petrochemical industry and the systemic problems of burning fossil fuels, and to start trying to blame individuals for individual consumption. And the only reason we have this debate is because of this propaganda campaign. Just shows you how monumentally evil these corporations are.
60s, I believe. And the simple truth is that human beings are full of innovation, full of opportunity. Look at how we already have changed as a country, our electricity supply. Look at how we're changing transport. Look, climate change for me, honestly, 3 priorities: jobs, jobs, jobs again, right? This is the biggest economic opportunity this country has had in decades, and we should be at the forefront of it.
All right.
So, Jan, it's not about telling people what to do. It's about getting the maximum benefits of what we have to do for the UK, and that's what this government's committed to.
Well, there's a number of things that climate scientists, and indeed our own climate change committee, say we need to do if we're going to get anywhere near reducing emissions to that extent. One of them, for example, is reducing our intake of meat and dairy. So the UN estimates that livestock emissions make up something like 14% of man-made greenhouse gases. How are you going to make us eat less meat and dairy without telling us what to do?
Look,
Well, the easy answer is just taxes. You use taxes to influence behaviour. That is not telling anybody how to live their life, but it's an excise tax. It is influencing behaviour in the same way that we put duty on cigarettes.
Exactly.
No one's banning cigarettes. What we are doing is making it more expensive, which, of course,
Exactly.
in a world in which people make their consumption choices based on how expensive things are, it makes people less likely to do it. Very simple.
Yep. You incentivize positivity and you disincentivize harmful or negative activities. That's the way it should work. Unfortunately, it doesn't always, but that's the basic idea behind it.
I don't take, to be honest, much truck for this. I don't think this is about telling people what they can eat. There'll be
So
innovations
do you
in
think
food production.
do you think we don't
innovations
need
in
to
how
eat
we...
less meat and dairy?
Well, I can't say I've personally committed to doing that, so I wouldn't expect anyone else to do the same. I think
You've
there
got the
has
Climate
been...
Change Committee saying that is
Well,
what
I
we
think
need
there
to do.
has been major innovation already in how food is produced. And I think, look, this is just too pessimistic a tone to take on this. This is about opportunity. It's about prosperity. If the UK wasn't at the forefront of this, we would miss out. And I think trying to sort of scare people into like your life's not going to be good and you can't eat the same food, that is not what this is about. It's about jobs, economic opportunity, investment in the UK. And if we were not leading, as we need to lead on this, we would be missing out on those things.
So, Damien, that's one view. You've got others taking the view that
Also-
unless you do start telling people what to do, for example,
It's worth pointing out as well, in the latest Unlearning Economics video about air pollution, he talks about a thing called the environmental Kuznets curve that essentially says there becomes a point in the life cycle of a country in which, after a certain period, there is no downside to investing in renewable energy. Now, this can differ based upon time and place and the kind of country it is, right? But this idea that people have in their heads that decarbonisation equals reduced living standards is the opposite of being true. Once you get past the peak in the environmental Kuznets curve, you are doing your own country a disservice by continuing to use fossil fuels, especially when you look at our country where, LNG is more expensive than just renewable energy, but we rely on it because it's part of our infrastructure and because of the power of the oil and gas lobby. It's nothing to do with whether it makes us more prosperous or not, but it would actually make us more prosperous and make us better off to decarbonise.
the hard things, like eating less meat and dairy, we just haven't got a hope in hell of meeting these emissions targets.
So what you don't want to do is start telling people how to live their lives. What you do want to do is find ways to achieve the carbon emissions reductions that we need to make by going with the grain of people's lives, ideally by helping people's lives to be better. You know, when you find ways to make heating cheaper, and obviously you're cutting carbon emissions, but that's a benefit to people. That's what you want to try and find. And look, our country has long been a leader.
Hang on, how does making heating cheaper reduce carbon emissions?
I'm assuming he means by influencing demand, which would be a good thing. I mean, he's not wrong. Like there is a cross-party consensus, or there was even before the election, a cross-party consensus on a war effort on home insulation, which is a way of making people's energy bills cheaper because you use less by influencing demand. Again, not particularly good for the petrochemical industry to have fewer people buying their product, but of course that makes things cheaper for everybody, makes our houses more efficient. And is good for the environment too. So, I mean, if it is indeed what he's talking about, maybe he should have voted. Maybe he should have stood for the Green Party because we had it in our manifesto.
I was about to say, as a Tory, I'm not sure that is what he meant. But
We'll see.
I mean,
We'll see.
maybe I'm doing him a disservice.
I mean, even Tory MPs were on board with the cross-party consensus on home insulation in the last parliament.
Tackling climate change. We were the first major nation to halve emissions. We were the first major nation to have an end date for unabated coal. And we continue to be a leader, and that is quite right. And along the way,
That is partly due to a considerable decrease in manufacturing in this country, and we're buying steel from other countries. So the emissions are coming from them.
Overwhelmingly,
the emissions still exist.
I didn't pre-watch, I promise. I didn't.
I mean, the other part of this as well is that not only have we outsourced our manufacturing to China, who we now blame for all the environmental problems because we buy their stuff, on top of this, they say, oh, well, other major nations haven't decarbonised as fast as we have. Yeah, because we had loads to decarbonise, because in the gold rush post privatisation of British gas, we built a huge swathe of gas power plants we didn't need to build if we'd have had state-directed in renewable energy, which people were calling for even back in the 90s. You know, people were still calling for this to get built.
And even when we got rid of our coal industry and replaced it with nothing, leaving much of the country an economic wasteland, we didn't stop using coal. There wasn't even a dip in coal usage initially, because we were just importing it from China, which was incredibly cheap to do. And we ignored the fact that the so-called workers' paradise of China were literally killing dozens and dozens of miners every year because of lax safety regulations.
Exactly. All we were doing, it was like the ultimate in neoliberal ideology. And then you compare that to other countries who, quote unquote, haven't decarbonised as fast as we have. I'm like, yeah, well, of course we've decarbonised faster than Norway because they didn't need to decarbonise because they were already making all of their electricity from fucking hydropower from the fields.
Overwhelmingly, the benefit to date has been about decarbonising the electricity supply and the reduction in coal. And there's been progress elsewhere, like on transport and industry, but we need more of that. We need more of that to come. It hasn't always been clear how it will come. And I remember when I was a minister looking after fiscal policy on energy back in 2015, people were always saying, oh, you've got these carbon budgets, but you've met them to date, you will not meet them in future. Country can innovate, and it does innovate. But where I take issue with the Prime Minister over this announcement this week, a 78% reduction was already a very stretching reduction. We were going to have to come up with a lot more things, a lot more ideas about how we were going to get there and rely on that kind of innovation. And to just unilaterally say we're going to increase it now from 78% to 81%, it may sound like a small difference, but I'll tell you, in that 3%, there's an awful lot of work to be done. And there is no detail about how he thinks we can get there. It's just like asserting that we can do something without saying what the means are to get there.
So, Ellie, as you're here representing the Green Party tonight, I assume you applaud the fact that the Prime Minister has increased the target. In terms of without telling us how to live our lives, many might argue that the easier things have been done, and it's the harder stuff now that needs to be done, which is why I picked on meat and dairy, for example. Because it's generally a consensus that meat and dairy consumption needs to reduce. Not necessarily get rid of it completely, but needs to reduce. Do you share that view?
Yes, I do share that view, but I don't think at all it's about telling people what to do. And
But so how
I
do
don't
you
think
get
anybody
people to
wants
do
to
it
be.
then?
You do that. You do it by encouragement, but you also do it by making it easier for people. I mean, government over many years has they've encouraged us to eat 5 a day, for example,
but
and
lots
now
of
we
us
think.
don't.
But we all think it's a good thing to do, right?
But people aren't necessarily doing it. So I mean, I noticed at one point the Green.
Wow, it hasn't been 100% successful, so let's not try anything.
Also, you'll notice that she didn't just kind of talk and blabber over the first 10 seconds of the other participants' responses here. Oh, what's that? The Green Party are on the panel. Better blabber and talk over you while you try and give a nuanced answer to the question I've just asked. But no, why not give me a simple answer right now? Every time they do this with the Green Party candidates. They did it with Tyler Denyer last time too.
You're suggesting taxing meat and dairy. You're not suggesting that anymore.
That's not in our manifesto, no. But we have said in our manifesto, we do recognise that reducing meat and dairy is part of the action we need to tackle climate change.
Reducing meat and dairy production?
I just want to kind of return to what Damien was saying there about the increase in the target. It's not true that there's no clarity about how to achieve it, because all Keir Starmer has done is adopt the target that the Committee on Climate Change says that we need to have, and they've got a huge report setting out exactly how we can and should do it as a country. With all of these things, if we'd acted earlier, it would be easier and it would be cheaper. But we are where we are now. And the reality is, we've just heard this week, we are crashing and burning through that 1.5 degree above pre-industrial temperature level. The reality of climate change is something that's hugely recognised by the huge majority of people. So to return to your question, Jan, how can Keir Starmer help us to kind of get there without telling us what to do? Well, the job of government is to make it easier, to provide the public transport so that we're not so dependent on our cars, to support nature-friendly farming in a proper way. I was raising that in the Commons just today. And to help support insulation of homes, investment in new energy, but also to show that leadership and saying we won't burn fossil fuels anymore.
That's all very well, but everything you just described costs money. Either money coming from the government, or money coming from us by changing our consumption habits, or money coming from farmers by changing the way in which they do things.
Yes. I don't know what else you want me to say to that. Yeah, yes,
Exactly.
it will. It will cost money to do things.
I think, and returning to the environmental Kuznets curve again, like literally you say, well, it's going to cost money. It will cost more money to clean up the mess if we continue to burn fossil fuels in the way that we do. And, you know, the continued expenditure on our energy system, right? We don't just create an energy infrastructure and then it lasts forever until then that's the end of it. No. They continue getting replaced and recycled and decommissioned and new ones being built. It's not just this continual thing that just lasts forever. And as we replace our system, why should we replace it with expensive and dirty fossil fuels when we could replace it with cheap, clean, renewable energy, which lasts longer and is better for the environment and is going to make us more prosperous? Again, we have passed the point in which creating renewable energy would therefore lead to a drop in prosperity. It is more prosperous to do so. We say, oh, well, it costs us money. Well, it costs money to, start a business selling aerials from the back of a van. But you'll eventually end up with Amstrad, right?
As we've seen in Valencia, not taking action costs huge amount of money and also human suffering.
Right.
The reality of the impacts of climate change is with us now. We can see that.
Yes.
We know it. And so Nick Stern told us 20 years ago, if we transition to net zero now, it'll be much cheaper than 20 years hence. The same applies
All right,
today.
well,
Let's put aside the debate about the impact and the science. I'm not disputing any of that. This is a question about method and pace. So the Prime Minister flew to Azerbaijan, a hereditary dictatorship, where the president opened proceedings at the COP summit by saying that fossil fuels were a gift from God. Britain is there representing 1% of global emissions. Powers that represent up to 60% of global emissions declined to attend, like China and India. Last year, the world used more coal than ever before in history. In other words, we're making a transition, good for us, moral leadership, way hey, but the rest of the world actually isn't. And the question is starting to emerge in consumer.
Oh my God. So the joke I did, literally the joke I did, which I thought was so stupid it was worth being risible about, that, well, America's not bothering, so why should we? Spray aerosols into the sky, fuck it, woo, burn coal for no reason, right? He's actually making that point seriously.
Yeah, and he even makes just lies, just saying, oh, well, China are the problem because they have high emissions. They have high emissions because they're the second most populated country on the planet with 1.7 billion people in the country. Right? Yeah, of course they make more emissions than the 70 million people in the UK or whatever it is that our population is now. Yeah, of course they do. Yet Xi Jinping, in China, in the year to date, from January to June in 2024, they built more photovoltaic capacity in China than America has ever built in the entirety of its existence put together. Yeah, of course, China are doing their bit to decarbonise. It's just slightly later than everybody else because they industrialised later than everybody else under Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, of course, it's taking a bit longer. They're actually putting in work to do it.
Consumers' minds, is my government making choices on my behalf, forcing me to live a certain way, to put up with either rationing or higher prices for energy, in order to make a very small dent in the overall amount of carbon
pause
being
again.
released?
Pause. It is more expensive to use fossil fuels, Tim. The thing that made our energy expensive, so much so that it almost crashed the economy, was the fact that we were relying on too much gas for our power, both to heat our homes and generate electricity. The price of LNG on European markets had massively increased due to supply shortages, due to sanctions placed on Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine. The volatility of that very specific internationally traded commodity that we needed to generate energy is why we had an energy crisis that made energy completely unaffordable for basically 90% of the country, so much so the government had to subsidise half the price. That was a problem of continued reliance on fossil fuels. Can there be a shortage of wind or of sun because of the actions of Russia or another state invading another? No. These are natural resources. So unless the sun burns out or the wind stops forever, there will always be energy to be found in renewable sources, which are not going to be undermined by unforeseen supply chain shocks. You are a fucking moron. You have the IQ of a vegetable.
So, Tim, I think you raised some really important points.
Thank you.
Energy cost is vital to the quality of life and also, by the way, to the competitiveness of industry. But we've crossed the Rubicon now. Clean energy is now cheaper than fossil fuels. power from wind and from solar is cheaper than power from fossil fuels. Consumers don't see the benefits. Our markets are still run in the old traditional way. We need market reform so that when we build wind farms, people get cheaper energy. It doesn't help that we keep...
Market reform? I thought the free market would solve everything.
But it's what's stupid. It's like the worst of every possible world, because the reason why we don't have a free market is because of privatization, which sounds ridiculous, but it's true. In that, because we privatized it all in dribs and drabs, and it's a private company that owns the grid, and then the way in which the pricing is done is based upon a model that doesn't make sense when you have multiple different competing private companies rather than a public owner. It's all just a mess. The whole system is a mess, and we pay more for energy because we pay the highest price as an individual unit. They can't be bothered working it out because it's all going into the same privately owned grid and then coming back out again as just energy. We can't tell whether you'll see your tariffs that say 100% renewable tariff. Those things don't exist. When you draw energy from the grid, it's all the same. It's all come from loads of different sources, but they have an understanding of the percentage mix of energy that's coming to you, so they can sell a certain number of renewable only tariffs before they've reached the limit of how much they can reckon they've generated from renewables. It's all a mess. None of it makes sense. And what we need is to have it publicly owned again and just get rid of the idea of marketization entirely.
Paying wind farms to turn off when it's windy instead of giving people cheap power at those times. But if we stand back and look at this, you talked about China. For a long time, China, as we know, was building more and more coal plants. But it's also now leading the way in clean energy. 59% of all of the renewable energy built over the last year in the world has been built in China.
But they are also still building a huge number of...
An enormous number of those coal plants will never get used. Many are being mothballed. But the reality is, why are they doing that? It's not because they're nice people, although, by the way, they may be. It's because they recognise that now that clean energy is cheaper and energy is the engine of growth for their industry, they're investing in it. And I can tell you, 6 or 7 years ago, if you went to Chinese cities, people wore masks, face masks, not because of COVID, but because of air pollution. That's gone.
Okay, so
54% of the cars sold so far in this year.
Are they as reliable? So in the case in this country, when you have a period like we've recently had, where the wind dies and where the sun doesn't shine, what happens?
Where the wind dies and the sun doesn't shine.
I mean, because again, conservatives have they have shit for brains. They have literally got entire fucking rows of vegetables where their brains should be. Well, because first of all, the answer to this question is very, very easy. Of course, in the, you put your wind turbines where it's very windy, like the Hebrides or offshore, or in places where you know that you have a certain amount of wind on average per year, so you can get a good idea of your returns on investment if you build your wind farm, And there's also a strategic reserve, which we can have from things like nuclear, which is essentially a clean power. Like, it doesn't change the atmosphere. You just have to deal with the radioactive waste. And of course, nuclear fusion, whatever, that's another thing. And also, there's this thing called pumped storage hydroelectricity.
You have to rely upon backup generation, which, by the way, is becoming harder to do because we've shut down coal. So what do? You rely on gas. Well, we're making that harder to do because we don't like exploration in the North Sea. So what do? You import the power from overseas.
Allow me to help
Nuclear!
you.
There's a solution.
Allow me to help you.
Okay.
Nuclear!
Yeah.
Again, just the level to which this man just deliberately tries to frame arguments by just missing out the obvious answer, which is have nuclear power stations like so many other countries do. Of course, Norway's in a special position because it happens to have fields, so it can have loads of hydro. But there's a reason why France kept its bills capped at a 4% increase over the energy crisis, because it gets its energy from fucking nuclear power.
Chai T-Rex with a very good point in chat with your stored hydroelectric issue. What about if water ceases to exist?
True. What if the water dies?
What if there's a mass evaporation event? All of the water of Earth disappears.
Yeah. I think we'll probably have a bit more of a problem with where we drink from rather than how we turn the TV on.
Cup of tea, nice and easy.
What if the Earth's gravitational pull just goes?
All I say is point us towards the sun and just let us drift to our inevitable doom.
Which is nuclear, and the very same green people
you
who
are going to get a word in at some point.
As somebody who buys more power than anybody in the UK, I can give you an authoritative answer on what we do. So the reality is, first of all, an electric car holds enough power in its battery for a typical house for the best part of a week. As more and more electric cars hit our roads, We have distributed storage of electricity that will get us through days on end without wind, right? It's not the whole solution, but it's a big part of it. And it helps us reduce our reliance on things like those fossil fuel backups. We're building...
We've seen two examples of Conservatives making points and then people more well versed in the topic slapping them in their face, metaphorically, of course.
Because Conservatives, they don't know anything. They're just completely ignorant. Research, what's facts? I have my feelings, though.
Yeah, they developed to the age of about 10, 11, 12 years of age, worked out everything they thought they needed to know about the world, and have changed nothing since. That's it. They know what's real, and that's it.
Yeah, it's what Mummy and Daddy told them at the country club.
Or more likely, what they're fucking hideous teachers, the psychopath factories that are private schools churn these kind of people out.
More interconnectors. It's always windy somewhere. It's always sunny somewhere. So as we connect our country to others, when they're windy, we get their power. When we're windy, we sell ours to them. And by the way, we're one of the windiest places in the world. This is a huge export opportunity for the UK.
This sounds like wind communism to me.
I feel like science has got us into this mess, so hopefully science can get us out of it.
How did science get us into what? This is the same shit about like, if scientists hadn't meddled, there wouldn't be a nuclear bomb. No, scientists worked out how the fucking world worked. Dickheads made a bomb with it. It's not fucking science. Science, what are you talking about?
Like, you know who I blame? You know who I blame for climate change? The person who invented the internal combustion engine. They're the real villain here, and not indeed the evil petrochemical billionaires.
Put our heads together and had a solution for COVID with a vaccine very quickly when we were in a crisis. Why don't we treat this like the crisis it is and put the best science minds together in a room?
Can I just answer that? Because there's a gap between...
No, don't applaud that.
No. The problem is that Britain has signed up to goals which close the gap between our ambition and where that innovation can get us and how fast it can get us there. I mean, the word innovation was used. That's a punt on the future. We will get there.
And that's the problem, right, is that her idea was, well, let's innovate, let's treat this like a crisis, put our heads together and find a solution. I'm like, there is already a solution, it already exists. It's called investment in green energy. We've already got the green energy, we've had done for years, for decades, we've had access to the technology that we need to decarbonise. Trains have existed for, centuries, right? Trains are not a new thing. That would help us reduce the amount of consumption of fuel we use by driving our cars. It's a political choice that this hasn't been done. It's nothing to do with whether or not we innovate or not. It's about the fact that we have been no political will to stand up to the petrochemical industry. That's the problem. And of course it leaves it open to fucking Tim Stanley bellend to just respond on, well, we're putting a bet on the future. I've got a bet that if we'd have just built some fucking trains 20 years ago, we wouldn't be in this bloody mess.
Yeah, literally. But when she says that we need to get our heads together and solve this with science, she means come up with a magic solution that costs no money and doesn't annoy anybody at all, which is literally impossible. But, thanks for participating.
Eventually, I'm sure renewables will eventually be abundant and cheap, but we're not there yet.
They're already cheaper. You've just heard the largest buyer of electricity in the country literally tell you renewables are cheaper. When you say we're not there yet, the man whose business it is to know says we are there. But your Tufton Street bosses, I'm sure, will love this.
Yet, but the government has closed the gap between now and then by tightening the targets, and you will pay for that through your bills and through purchasing, because you may well be forced to do things like buy heat pumps, etc. This is all I'm saying is we already have one of the highest prices for energy in the world, which is very difficult, not just for the consumer, but for industry. The government is unnecessarily bringing forward morally minded targets such that you will have to pick up the tab while we wait for that innovation to come through.
Tim, can I help with two things? I mean, the first is you don't need to be forced to buy a heat pump. Sooner or later, companies are innovating to make them better than gas boilers. Okay, it is our responsibility and duty to do that. We need to get the market to scale, but it's happening.
But is that going to happen in time?
It is. It's happening very quickly. 3 years ago, no one had heard of one. All of a sudden, they're everywhere. That's pretty remarkable.
Well, they're not everywhere. That's the thing. I mean, they're nothing like the targets that the government
We've
set.
had 220,000 people inquire for heat pumps in the last year to our company alone.
It's way below what the targets
the
that the
government
government
wants 600,000 by 2027. So look, our company alone has had the third of the inquiries needed to hit the government target in 3 years'
I
time.
think he wants installations, not inquiries.
The installations are held back by an enormous amount of policy, which we can talk about as well. I was going to talk about electric cars very briefly. You should all watch a video by Johnny the Cabbie on YouTube, in which he gets his first electric cab and describes how cheap it is to run, how pleasant it is to drive, and so much better than the diesel it replaces. And the batteries, you can't recycle petrol, but electric vehicle batteries have got a life now of up to 600,000 miles, at the end of which they can either be recycled or used as static batteries in homes and grids to help deal with the problem Tim is worried about what do we do when it's not windy. So actually, they're a huge upgrade on fossil fuels, because with fossil fuels, we have to keep paying to get it out of the ground and turn it into carbon dioxide. With batteries, they're a permanent asset.
Can I just come on a few of those? Look,
And on top
10
of
years
that as
ago,
well, just again, Tim, going back to Tim Stanley's stupid bloody point. My God, does he wind me the fuck up as well, saying, "Oh, it's going to be more expensive for you," and I'm just like, "Well, no, it's not going to be, because they're already cheaper." And he says, "Well, we have the highest energy prices in the world." It's because of marginal fucking pricing. There's nothing to do with the fact that we've decarbonised quicker. That's why our energy is more expensive. No, it's because we're still paying top dollar prices for LNG, and that makes our renewables more expensive when we pay for them.
But that's the thing. I mean, I slightly push back against the guy on the left, the electricity fucking chap, saying that the problem that Tim is worried about. Tim isn't worried about anything. Tim is being paid by petrochemical industry or Tufton Street or whichever particular brand of wanker is behind his particular piece of astroturf nonsense to make points. That's it. He doesn't actually believe a damn thing, I don't think, about any of this. He doesn't really understand it for a first start, clearly. He's just got a pre-prepared list of talking points that he's going to say.
An offshore wind farm that was commissioned in the UK cost about 3 times the retail price of electricity. It has come down faster than if I was on the show 10 years ago, faster than I could ever have believed it to be possible. Stable framework for business to work in, exactly as Greg is saying. Gentleman here asked, why can't we all just come together on it? Look, a lot of this affects people's lives, and you can't take politics out of people's lives. You always need a show like this for us to be able to have these discussions, and it's the right way to do it. But actually, there's broadly, I'd say, in the UK, a pretty decent cross-party agreement on it, more so than you have in other countries. I do think we have to throw everything at it. I think that includes nuclear. Absolutely. I think that's maybe a difference between Labour.
No, we're not having this American pronunciation. No, nuclear, not nuclear. Nuclear. If you start saying it like that, you get on the trebuchet, okay? And we fling you over to America where you fucking belong.
And the Green Party, I think, on that, you've got to throw everything at this because it's so important. Colleague asked, member of the audience, he asked about carbon capture and storage. Yes, it's really important, because if you don't have that kind of technology, all you will do to hit these targets is offshore British industry, and that is not the way to do it. You've got to look at how we can continue.
What fucking industry? There's no industry to offshore. We've got nothing.
Well, what about Games Workshop?
Kind of
That's true. I just know that. You know what? Good point.
Industrial base, the jobs base, actually have more of that because of the process. And if you don't have that kind of technology, you're not going to be able to have those kind of industries in future. So that long-term investment from the government to deliver that system is really, really important.
All right, look,
Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.